Can you hear me?
How are you, sir?
I am fine. How are you? Good to see you.
Likewise, you look fabulous.
Well, I don't know. I'm trying. Today's my birthday. So this is.
Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's a happy birthday.
It's it's a birthday present for me to be able to talk to you. So that's a plus.
Well, excellent, excellent. So, well, I will try to keep it short because you have a birthday thing.
We've got a lot to talk about, so I'm not in a rush unless you are. So.
No, I'm not. I'm not because I want to chat with you. So, a little bit of background of this. By the way, I'm recording this, so I hope you don't mind. And we will just slice small pieces of our conversation and to broadcast when the book is published. So I just want to make sure you understand that. That's okay?
I am fine with that.
Okay. So what are you doing? What have you been doing? Actually, let's talk about that first.
Well, I've been spending, honestly, a lot more of my time these days on the November election than I have on education, just because I think if we screw up the November election, a bunch of this stuff doesn't matter at the end of the day. So,
well, where you are, it won't matter, right? What do you? I think it's it's states like Florida, Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Actually, Wisconsin matters a lot more. Are you doing some work there?
Well, I've been doing multiple things. So I've been raising a lot of money for Senate candidates in key states, which could end up being Kansas at some point, interestingly.
Oh yeah, I look at the Kansas, the Republicans complete open, right? I mean, nobody's there.
Yeah, maybe Chris Kobach, who's pretty beatable.
Oh yeah, I don't think he has a chance, right?
Yeah, so I've done 4 and I've got a 5th one coming up, but these Senate things we've been doing online, we've raised for 4 candidates an aggregate of $500,000.
Well, that's very impressive. Is your organization or you individually?
Well, it's a kind of an informal group. I was with Obama's campaign from the very beginning. So it was kind of the core group that were the National Finance Committee and at the beginning of 2007.
Uh-huh.
Most of them ended up being ambassadors, which is, I can't imagine something I'd find more exasperating. But anyway, they all liked it. And so we've done things for, who have we done it for? Hickenlooper in Colorado, Sarah Gideon in Maine, Teresa Greenfield in Iowa, and Steve Bullock in Montana. And then we have one Thursday for Cal Cunningham in North Carolina, and then one at the end of the month for Mark Kelly in Arizona.
So are you running events with this? Are you running like having friends coming over? Are you doing that, or is it just more of online?
Inordinate amounts of time emailing people trying to get them to donate. But I mean, like for Cunningham, I probably, between what we've given and what I've raised, I've done like $50,000 for that one event.
That's very impressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very good. So you're pretty happy.
Particularly for somebody who hates fundraising, which I do, like I never raised any money for education just because I fund the whole thing myself. But, with campaigns, there's a limit to what you can do yourself. And so you've got to get other people to do something. So I'm sure people at this point are like, oh no, another email from Ted. Like auto delete.
Well, you can send some to me because I think they are. It's going to be really significant. The Senate. If we had a control of the Senate, Trump wouldn't be in the office right now. But I don't know if Pence would be any better. But that's another question.
Yeah. Well, I think he would be less hateful. Less divisive. I mean, I'm not. My big issues. And it sort of gets a little bit in the way of my education stuff, but it's not around a policy issue. You're recording this, but anyway, I mean, like,
I'll cut it. Don't worry about it. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
Like an issue like, pro-choice, pro-life. I have my own views, but I think there's plenty of room for a respectful discussion about that. So it's not really that level. It's just and you see it as well, right? The impact of Donald Trump in terms of being a role model to kids in schools everywhere. And if he gets reelected, what that says to kids about, well, you have to be honest, you can't bully, or you can't cheat, or you can't take credit for something you didn't, like all these messages just go down the toilet because, I mean,
he's not handling it. I mean, that you're absolutely right. It's not only like a role model, but also look at American status in the world.
Yeah.
And look at how casual, Trump has been with policies. Just, I'm not going to be part of it. And I'm done with it. It's just, it's shocking. That's what I think what worries me, right? As a person there, just, does this crazy things. You can't just use the word crazy to do it, And I'm quite shocked. And you know this a lot better than I do. Why all the Republicans don't come out to teach him something, to rebut him,
Yeah. I think, and one of the things I post about is I think people don't pay full attention to the fact that when he goes after somebody on Twitter, they're now subject to death threats. They and their family, to a large extent, are on the run. And he has no hesitation about tossing things out from time to time about time to exercise your Second Amendment rights.
Yeah.
And, we're tiptoeing right up to a point where there could be armed conflict in our country. And if anybody thinks he would show restraint or be responsible about that,
oh no,
not for a second. And so,
no,
so it's a scary time. And I sort of feel like, and you and I will connect these dots, but many people, maybe the vast majority of people don't. But you sort of reap what you sow when it comes to education. Like every school says we teach people how to think critically. We don't.
Yeah.
We prepare kids to be engaged.
Hold on. You're getting into education now. So those are significant topics. That's what exactly I want to talk about. So let's talk about something more positive.
We'll go with the flow on this, but that's what I've been doing, and I still work, in the education front. I'm still spending a fair amount of time and making some headway at the state level in some places. But we can get to that.
Oh, well, the reason I want to talk to you are the first I'm talking about this book is because I really think you have a great understanding of the education system. The schools, and you've done work, So I think, so what I would like to ask you, Ren, is about where to go with the current education. I was going to write a book to say, forget about the schools. But then I said, well, schools are here, so we got to do something about that. So what I'm going to do is, Ted, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions and say as much, as little as you want, and say anything else you would like. Okay. So we're going to go with that. Okay. As a birthday gift. Okay.
Perfect.
So, let's actually start with the first question. Is really, you've you've done a lot of work in education, which is a blessing. So what do you think the current education, do you think the current education system prepares kids for today and the future?
Well, I hate to be a pessimist about that specific point because I have lots of areas I'm optimistic about, but I think not only does it not prepare kids for the future, I think it anti-prepares them. And by that, I mean that we have kids, for the most part, and this is not our teachers' fault. So I'm a staunch defender, champion for the teachers that power through this stuff. But our education priorities and policies have kids, to a very large extent, memorizing material for short-term basis for tests, material they don't care about, they're not going to retain, and even if they retain it, they'll never use it. And other than that, it's great, right? And the problem is that the intensity we bring on that, I think, is actually diminishing the very skills and character traits kids need to do well in a world that's changing at warp speed. And so does it prepare kids? I'd say emphatically, not only does it not positively prepare kids, we're impairing the life prospects of far too many of our kids through this thing we call education.
That's you've already identified some of the problems. To me, the biggest problem, I think, is that we have so many kids and we have one school. That's my point. Is that we had one school for all children. So we create all this borders. Everybody comes in, good or bad, like or not. That's going to be a problem. Can you say a little bit about we have this one pathway towards college, towards life, one curriculum. Say something about that. We are confining our kids within these borders.
Yeah. Well, I'll take from the cliche. We'll start with the cliche: square pegs and round holes. And I'd say kids come not in square shapes, but in this wide, vast mosaic of shapes. And we're trying to cram them all through a round hole that's irrelevant, increasingly irrelevant, because machine intelligence does what's required to get through that round hole. And when I visit schools, I love to start with the question: if I put a student here tomorrow morning who excelled at memorizing material, replicating low-level procedures, and following instructions, I'm willing to bet a large amount that kid would be on your honor roll. And invariably, the answer is yes. And I say, you know what? That's exactly what machine intelligence does perfectly, instantly, for free. And so if we're pushing kids to get good at something that the world doesn't value, and we're paying an enormous price in the process of crushing out of them the skills and character traits that matter, telling too many kids they're not gifted or proficient when they actually have amazing gifts, if we're cramming every kid into a round hole that increasingly is a useless hole, that's why I said that I think we're not only not preparing, we're impairing their life prospects. And then the question, the obvious following is, why would we ever do that? And one of the lines I use in my talks, which gets a great response, is, we teach kids what's easy to test, not what's important to learn. If we cared about creativity and for kids in school, how do you test? Like, every kid would be doing something different and bold and imaginative. But if that's the case, how do we compare them? How do we compare a kid in Kansas to a kid in Maine to a kid in Mobile, Alabama, if they're doing creative, distinctive work? Well, if you have informed adults evaluating each of them on a different basis, they can give detailed, thoughtful feedback about the degree to which the kid's work is really truly creative and interesting. But can you boil it down to a number? I mean, I think the people who say we can measure creativity, we can measure leadership, we can measure curiosity, we can measure empathy, we can measure all the things that we know define how well an adult does in life. I say, no, you can't measure. You can assess it, you can gauge it, you can provide feedback. It's why interview processes work so well, right? If you and I were talking, and this were a job interview and you were considering me for a junior faculty position there, you could gauge my suitability or lack of suitability for a position, whether I have the skills and character traits that would fit. But if somebody said, well, let's put Ted and every other aspiring faculty member on a single dimensional grid of a test score, that would tell you nothing. It would tell you nothing. And so that, I think, is what's going on, is we've just decided the most important thing in school is for kids to generate the data that policymakers and the College Board can glom onto, that makes their life a bit more efficient. But we're ruining millions of kids' prospects and lives and passion for learning in the process.
Well, I mean, tell me a little bit about your own school experience. I don't know, because think about when kids come to school, we have something made for them. When you went to school, something were made. You got to go to math, you got to go to literacy, so you go through the whole pre-planned, as diverse as we think our schools are, they're actually very similar in many ways. So what was it like when you went to school? When you just enjoyed everything? Were you a super kid, or what was it like, if you remember any of those?
So I mentioned before, today's my 68th birthday, so people could do the math on when I was in school. So I graduated from high school 50 years ago, and I often think back to those times, and two things stand out. Well, a lot of things stand out, but two in particular. One is the subjects I took, the way they're taught 50 years ago, are pretty much the same as they are today. I've been back to my high school over the past year, and I love the leadership team there. They're trying to reimagine school, and I think doing heroic work there. But when I talk to the kids, what are your courses? Many of them are taking exactly what I took. I mean, exactly what I took, except I had to take shop, and we've gotten rid of shop, right? Anything hands-on, anything applied, anything pragmatic, we've gotten rid of. But the second big difference is, when I was in school, school consumed maybe half of my waking hours, but not a lot more. When I think back to high school, I'm sure I did homework, but I don't remember doing homework. I do know this, is that we got an announcement one day that said, if you're thinking of going to college, you need to bring in a check for $15, I think it was, and take this thing called the SAT. And I and all my other classmates read the instructions at the start, because we had no idea what it was. We just sort of like read the instructions and take the test. And so that world is so different, a world where you had plenty of free time to explore, create, invent, where to a large extent, the things outside of school we were doing because we wanted to. I didn't pick my extracurriculars because, oh, this is going to look good on a college application. I mean, I liked writing, and so I volunteered for and took on a more and more senior role with the school newspaper. And none of that was to pad a resume or an application. It was because I thought this might be fun, this might be interesting. And that world is so different today. And so, we've sort of unfortunately said we're going to double down and bring dramatically increased degrees of intensity on all the wrong things, while we've pushed out of school all the right things. And as I say, this is not our teachers' fault. Like I travel everywhere. I wrote a book with the subtitle, What School Could Be, but with the subtitle, Insights and Inspiration from Teachers Across America. Every teacher that's listening to me say this is not saying, oh my gosh, that had never occurred to me. They're all saying, absolutely, we've been saying this for years. The only reason I get any credit, I think, is that I have a business background and actually get out in the field and interview people and observe, where most business people sit in a glass palace in Seattle and decide what everybody has to do in schools for the next 7 years, and then write a letter every 7 years saying it didn't work, so I've got a new thing every school needs to do. I mean, tell me how that makes sense. But that's, the problem is, and that's the difference. And so for me, the other thing, I often pick, one of my favorite whipping boys is, and anybody who's a math teacher hates for me to say this, so I apologize, but the math I took in the 1960s actually made some sense, because we didn't have supercomputers in our pocket. So being fast and agile with low-level math procedures did you some good if you were an architect or a surveyor. In the book I wrote with Tony Wagner, I highlighted the fact that the Enola Gay, and you could have a great debate about whether dropping an atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was the right thing to do or not. But what's true is that that plane had two engineers with slide rules on, like they had to make calculations quickly to make sure they made the right exact timing for the drop. And so in that world, all the math that prevails to this day in our schools actually made sense. Today it makes no sense, right? We should take a bulldozer to grade 8 through 12 math because it's all right there on photomath on your phone. And imagine if we did take a bulldozer and said to kids, all the low-level crap is gone because you can do it instantly, perfectly, for free with your phone. Now let's start doing math that lets you solve problems, gain insight, make contributions. Well, that math track would be completely different. But you know who would hate that? ETS, the people that design these standardized tests, because today's math is perfect for the test designers. It just is useless in life.
So this is a great day. Okay, that's a great conversation. That was beautiful because this is precisely, 68, 18 years. Let's just imagine just like, 50 years, So for 50 years or for more than 50 years, you probably know, teachers are unhappy with what's going on. We know parents are unhappy, but, and then whenever you talk about change, people say, oh, parents won't change, teachers won't change. So from your, wisdom, Ted, tell us, what do you think the real problem is, for schooling? Why hasn't school really improved? There's many people trying to put their science, this, that, what is the real problem,
Yeah. And as you know quite well, because you've provided such amazing leadership and inspiration throughout your career, this is not easy, right? We know that this is hard. And I often liken it to, and many people know this story, so I'll be brief, but the layout of our keyboard, the laptop sitting in front of you and me right now, the QWERTY layout, was actually designed intentionally to make us the slowest possible typist. Because back in the day when you had a mechanical typewriter with keys thumping up against the paper with a carbon ribbon, the biggest issue was if the keys were going too fast, they'd jam. So some smart people sat around and said, what's the least efficient way to lay out the keyboard? Well, of course, today it's all electronic. And so why do we still have the QWERTY layout? Well, there's this whole installed base of hardware, this whole installed base of established practice, and trying to change one gets really hard when the other sucks you back to inefficient. And I think we have the same issue in school, is that they call it a system for a reason. And so when you think about going rogue on it, and some families go rogue, some teachers go rogue, there are plenty of people, I wrote a book about it. You've shed a lot of light on this. They're out there. There are the people going rogue on things and just say there's a better way. But it tends to get sucked back in by obsolete state mandated curriculum, state mandated exams, and who can get a high school degree, a completely obsolete college admissions process. And so those things tend to be lock-in, and make it hard. It's heartbreaking, right? You visit these schools as well. You go to these schools that are dealing with kids in the toughest of all circumstances with these remarkably dedicated teachers who each year brace themselves for when the state rankings come out of schools. And these teachers are dealing with kids who come to school hungry, kids with difficult home circumstances, kids hanging on by their fingernails just to get through in life. And yet they'll be rated a sub-performing school, a D school or an F school. Why? Because their standardized test performance isn't very good. And you just say, well, why doesn't somebody get their tail out of their chair in their office and actually go visit these schools and see the remarkable things they're doing for their kids? But they don't, right? Because that would take time. So they just want the data, and the data comes from the test. And so I think, we've sort of had this lock-in, and there are leverage points. If college admissions changed, K through 12 would change overnight. If states started looking for different things, K through 12 would change quickly. But I think today those are big impediments.
Well, I've read a book, that's thanks for sending that to me. It's a beautiful book, and so in many ways, we are at a time that we already, I think, have come to a time that schools are not getting our kids ready for, and then we're going to get worse, the situation. Do you think, just think about the technology that has changed, let's say over the past, I'm not going to ask you 6 to 8 years, over the past 50 years, you're aware of, how has technology changed and how has it affected society? I think you are the right person to ask about that.
Yeah. Well, the macro things, the things that worry me are, first, anything routine or, anything that a lot of people do in more or less the same way is being automated out of the it's not going to be in the hands of humans. And we're going through this pandemic, right? If anybody thinks there's a business in the world today that's saying we need to rethink our processes to have more humans involved, I mean, not in a million years. The ones that are more automated did better. And so that trend is irreversible. It's accelerating, and it's just going to define life for all of our young kids. If it's routine, if it's something many other people do kind of in the same way, a machine will do it better. Which gets back to that question I ask to schools is memorize material, replicate low-level procedures, follow instructions. If that's what kids, whether they do well at that or poorly, if that's what they're good at coming out of school, a machine does it better. And that's one of my big fears. So career issues, enormous. But I think we're also seeing enormous complications when it comes to informed, responsible citizenship. And how many kids, I love the study that this group at Stanford did, can our very best students fact check? And you can find Phi Beta Kappas at the most selective colleges in the country. And all it takes to make them think something's accurate and well-researched is a credible URL, a professional looking website, and footnotes. And the story could be how everybody's diet would be improved by chewing razor blades every morning. But if it meets those 3 criteria, www.truefactsondiet.org, a great website, and footnotes, they'll say, yeah, where are the razor blades? Let's chew them. And so technology is greatly complicating things. I think one of the things that we mistake is, and I in my book, I'm generally very positive, but I do call out groups that I think have, in my mind, completely lost their way when it comes to the role of technology. So how do we take a boring lecture on low-level stuff your laptop or your phone does perfectly, put that boring lecture online, have kids watch it and take multiple choice recall-based tests to see whether they, in a very short-term passing way, have mastered that low-level content that they should never even be doing in the first place. And so to me, that's why I find a lot of great schools that actually have no technology. So people that say that the key for kids going forward is the most current laptop and 5G access, I don't buy that. I do think the digital divide is important. I think giving kids free access to resources is important. So I think letting kids, sort of structuring the school challenges around with the assumption you can retrieve any information you want online readily, that's the kind of school challenges that we need. But those can often be done without any laptop in the school. You've seen those schools, right? Where the kids are debating each other, where they're really bringing great thought to things, where they're inventing and creating. And so I feel like the real effect of technology on education needs to be, what does technology make obsolete? How does technology make us way more productive? And how do we structure learning challenges that are ahead of that curve instead of chasing that curve? And way too often we're chasing that curve and draw false comfort in thinking that if a kid watches some video can answer 9 out of 10 questions right, that they've actually learned it. I mean, they don't. And but it's accelerating, and I think that's one of the things I really emphasize. I mean, I don't give myself credit for being an education expert. I love the ones that the people.
Oh, you are actually, you are education.
I'm humble about that. And if somebody said to me, your job, Ted, is to get 30 kids in a classroom to get excited about balancing chemical equations, I'd say, like, man, I could never do that. I really admire the people who can. So there are, I mean, but I'm really sincere. This isn't just a head fake. The people who have crafted those learning experiences, who know how to reach kids' individual differences, that really get their kids engaged and confident and learning how to learn and finding joy in that. That's an expertise I do not have, but I totally admire. But I do know a lot about innovation, and people are dramatically underestimating how fast this stuff is moving ahead, and how many young adults, middle-aged adults, older adults are just going to be totally left behind, already are being left behind, because they have a very narrow set of skills and an inhibited mindset. And if you're in that box, that very narrow box, that small box, and machines gobble up that box, like you need someplace else to go. And we don't give that to so many of our kids, so many of our adults.
What you said, actually, there's one really interesting point that is, there are many points that's interesting, but there's one thing that really hits me is when you talk about kids not ready for today or not ready for the future. Look at we use the Trump thing, the fake news movement, just the massive right now. In a sense, it's our kids were not ready for this. Our schools did not prepare them to live in a society that's just so massive with all kinds of news, all kinds of information. You look at the last few years in the US and maybe many parts of the world has the same issue. I think right now we're using policies, we're using laws to solve that problem, but I don't think that problem can be solved. I think, so tell me, Ted, about how do you think that problem can be solved? I think, that is adults, citizens needs to not only find jobs, but to live a life. To live in the life needs a lot of knowledge, information, skills. I think in our education, we've been speaking too much about finding a job. We're speaking too much. So just think about just living as a person. What would mean, just in today's society.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we do a remarkable job with kids of crushing out of them what they need to, when I want to get audiences really upbeat and excited, I just ask them to visualize a group of 4 and 5-year-olds, right? I mean, these young kids have all the character traits that we would hope adults have and carry with them to their grave. They're curious, they're joyful, they learn at warp speed, they create, they invent, they think outside of the box. I mean, it's not as though it's not part of being a human. I think it's core to being human. But I think when you expose people to environments for 12 to 16 years or longer, where it's all about jumping through hoops, navigating, you see the same thing. It's heartbreaking. I observe preschools and just say, let's give these kids time to ask some questions. And these kids ask the most amazing questions. And then I go to high schools and it's like, the only question I hear is, will this be on the test? I do, as you know, I don't ever charge for what I do. And I do volunteer and do lots of things with adult groups, book clubs, whatever. And we'll get to the question part. And I like face a Zoom screen now with like 40 people on it and none of them have questions. And I'm thinking, and I actually say it, I'm saying, like, if I had 40 people on a Zoom screen that were all 5 years old, they'd have a million questions. Like, where did we go wrong in terms of crushing out of people their curiosity? And so preparing for, we don't, I mean, what should school be about? It's sort of like the core purpose of school. It should be preparing us in full for life. And career is part of it. I always say, you show me a 25-year-old who's been home for 3 years, who can't get any kind of a toehold in the economy, that's not going to end well. But it's clearly more than that. And yet, when you look, how many kids actually in high school read books start to finish and just thrive on, just feel that emotional connection versus going to Wikipedia and reading the summary, right? It's like because we laid out in front of kids this sprawling morass of content that some committee somewhere has decided every kid needs to spend 20 minutes on the Constitution and 13 minutes on the Progressive Era and 12 minutes on the Balkan War. Like we just sort of assume that that if they miss any speck of this, they're going to be set back for life. But the reality is none of it is retained, and so you mentioned the fake news, and to this day, our high school kids are still spending time on MLS versus Chicago style footnotes when there's a website that you just put in the quote and it gives you the perfect footnote format. And they never spend any time on fact checking. Can fact checking be taught? Absolutely. And back to what question you asked earlier about my time versus today, when I was in high school, when people were absolutely going after the Vietnam War and student leadership made the difference, right? But back then, once Walter Cronkite said, I don't believe this is a just cause and I don't believe it's a winnable war, you didn't have a third or 40% of the population saying fake news, like we're actually winning. Like once Walter Cronkite weighed in, kind of America went with that because he was credible. Where's a credible source today, right? You have great news organizations that if they get it wrong, will do a retraction within a day. And 40% of our population think they're lying every single minute. And you have other groups that will give credence to Alex Jones saying that the Sandy Hook families, that none of these kids were murdered, that they all did it just to take away your guns. And 40% of our population will say, yeah, they're just trying to take away our guns. It's like, what? I mean, this isn't okay. This is crazy time.
So given that crazy time comment, I want to just get back to another issue to say, so COVID has been just like any disease, just happened. And what do you think the aftermath will be, or if there is an aftermath? What do you think this whole thing will be like?
Yeah, actually, I would turn around and want your opinion on that, because I feel like, what I worry that the aftermath is that a bunch of people just say, God, this was pure chaos. Nothing got done. What a mess. I just can't wait for things to get back to normal. If that happens, we will miss the opportunity of a century. I think a different path for schools, districts, states, certainly lots of families, is to say, whoa, what actually worked? I did with I don't talk about my kids generally, but out of their 12 years, 13 years, whatever, of K-12, we homeschooled occasionally, with special circumstances, but we did that. And so I will talk about me and my progression is when we started, I was like, what do they need to cover? Like this was back in the time we had to get CD-ROMs for the courses, right? Oh my gosh, fourth grade math. What are the things we have to cover? And, like I realized, my gosh, like, first of all, like a lot of it wasn't that useful. But second of all, when I was trying to make my kids study stuff they didn't care about, it was like a really exhausting daily battle. And over time, I finally just said, what do I care more about? What they learn, or do I care more about, are they learning? And I realized if I just get them to learn, why do I care that much? Like, isn't the whole point of this to find stuff they're interested in and let them run with it? And once we made that shift, everything changed, right? Everything changed. And I think I then redefined my role, not of today we're on lesson 27 of some terribly thought through math curriculum on a CD-ROM or a worksheet or whatever. But I said, like, what's interesting today? What do we want to run with? And like I love the phrase, anything leads to everything. And if the role of an adult isn't to march them through something that some committee defined, say, oh, you're interested in whatever, and then find the adjacencies. Music leads to the math of music, to the physics of percussion, like leads to everything if you think about it the right way. And if they
go ahead.
Yeah, if they
finish the sentence,
they're finding joy in that learning and they're actually mastering it, you are so far ahead of what's happening with most kids in school today that I just say, like, what's the downside?
No, I was going to catch what you said. I think in almost in all kind of learning, our biggest problem is really whether the teacher can allow you to learn, not define what you should learn. Because right now, I think when you go to school, the first thing that's decided is what you should learn. If you look at any place you go, so teachers feel impossible to move away from that, to liberate from the accountability testing, the standards, the pacing guide, all, and then you are not necessarily willing to treat that as a priority or interested in, or maybe you have something else. So I think that's what you capture something. That's probably that is one of the biggest problem is the conflict of interest in what to learn, and what I want to learn does have to be judged by you. And so that's, I think that's how do the adults change that mentality is probably key, right? When you think about that.
Absolutely, and the real truth is, if you, particularly in the higher grades, if we were to put share a screen and look at kind of 3-week or so chunks of things you spend time on in high school, and then ask ourselves or any other adult how much of this you actually use as an adult, you'll find that far more of it falls in the category of balancing chemical equations or memorizing what a gerund is, or short-term cramming of vocabulary words for a foreign language you never spoke again after high school. And very little of that effort, which by the way, a lot of our high school kids are spending enormous amounts of time on their schoolwork. Very little of it is actually what you end up using later in life. And so people say, yeah, but it's like getting them excited about it. It's great exposure. And I say, you know what? I don't think so. Because when I ask these kids what they learned in AP history, US history, more of them tell me I learned I never want to take history again, than tell me I got really excited about the impact of the Civil War. When I ask kids what they learned in AP biology, most of them say to me, I never want to take biology again. And so you start to look at that and you say, what are we accomplishing, right? We're rushing them through this laundry list of things. They prepare for their exams by going to the bookstores or ordering online or finding an online site that gives them kind of the modern day equivalent of digital flashcards. And they're deciding they hate the subject area. I mean, is that education at its best? I mean, surely not, right? And I was talking to somebody, he asked me, what would you do if you could like snap your fingers and change STEM education for high schools? And I said, here's what I'd do. I'd say every kid's going to take a 9th grade, not graded science class where our only goal is to get kids excited about science, and have it go from subatomic physics through the universe, have it cover, biology and chemistry, but the stuff kids think is interesting, just kind of recreate that passion you see in 5-year-olds for insects or dinosaurs or reptiles, which we see all the time, right? It's not the kids hate science. Our 5-year-olds show us all the time how fascinating it is. Supposing we just doubled down on that in 9th grade, how much worse off would our kids be? I mean, oh my gosh, everything would be so much better. But do we do that? No, because some moron in a state legislature, sorry, state legislators, but you're doing a lot of damage here, has decided if kids don't cover all these core concepts and we don't fund some testing group to design the curriculum and the tests, that we're leaving these kids behind in a world that I think we overrate STEM skills in the world today. But nevertheless, you'll hear these people say, recite it as truth when it's not. Every kid needs to be a STEM kid, and we've got to cover everything. And if we somehow missed, what a neuron is, or whatever, that these kids will be irreparably harmed.
That gets something we talk a little bit about, but I want to just hear you say a little bit more. Then I'm going to ask you one final question. Then we're going to end. Then we're going to chat something else, because this is something really important. When you say everybody needs to be STEM, everybody needs to be global. So all these legislators or whatever body that who constructs this curriculum for all kids, I think that they honestly, I think they are the biggest problem. In many ways, that is, they have kind of created a net that everybody is swimming within a net in many ways. So what how do we solve that problem? Really, like if I've been thinking a lot about this. What if we return to, let's say, 100 years ago? Schools are just schools. There'll be no legislators and there's no accountability. Just local schools run their schools so they can decide what to do. Or maybe having students bring their own learning projects, adults retreat. So what would you think the future can be?
Well, it's what they're sort of like what the future could be and how we get there. So let's go with those two things. What the future could be is, I'm going to liken education to parenting. And in my book, I reference a different book about parenting, but it was this guy, Mac Bledsoe, he wrote a book called Parenting with Dignity. And his basic message was your role as a parent is to make yourself irrelevant. I mean, you're not in terms of being loving, not in terms of being supportive, but that when your newborn comes along, you make 100% of their decisions. If you've done a great job of parenting, by the time they're 18, you make 0% of their decisions. They are so independent, so confident, so capable at making their own decisions that you step out. And I say, what if education viewed it the same way? What if our goal was to help kids find their passion, help them get good at learning on their own, and then get out of their way? But that's not our goal. Every step of the way in education, we prepare them for more education. And our policymakers, from state legislators right up to Barack Obama, and I'm a fan of Obama's, but I quoted him in an unflattering way in the book I wrote with Tony, where he said, he goes to these, it's kind of in a condescending way, I thought, said, I go to these 8th grade graduations and they're all excited, but what they don't know, but I know, is not only do you need a high school degree, not only do you need a college degree, you probably need a master's degree to do well in life in the 21st century. And I call bullshit on that. It's so easy now to learn on your own if you're capable of learning on your own and you know what you want to do. And so why don't we have that as our goal? It's education's goal is to equip kids with what skills they need so they don't need formal, costly instruction. That seems like a great goal, not the only goal, but a great goal. How do we get there? I'll say this, you have been an amazing leader in this fight. I do my best to be a leader and to weigh in on it. More people have to have more fight in them on this. I mean, I gave a keynote at Deeper Learning in 2019, and I put a lot of time and energy into it, but I challenged that audience. This is like 1,000 of the most progressive educators in the country. And I said, if these two things changed overnight, education would change overnight: college admissions and state mandated exams. And so I offered grants to groups that would do either the following, which is organize alums for your college, because a lot of you went to the most selective colleges in the country. Imagine right now, if we were to wage a campaign against the admissions officer of college XYZ and say, change your criteria, the admissions officer will blow us off. But if a growing number of alums went to a college president, head of development, and admissions and say, you need more thoughtful, more sensitive, more authentic admissions criteria that value kids for bold, creative work instead of for jumping through hoops. And until you do, we are cutting you off. Not one more penny. We will donate not one more penny, and we're going to try to get more and more alums on this until you have thoughtful, authentic admissions criteria instead of the bullshit you have now. You're cut off. Boy, would that change things. State legislators, supposing you had hundreds of thousands, in the big state, millions of citizens sign a petition that say these state legislators have to take the test they make their 11th and 12th graders take with a proctor and publish your scores. If a kid can't get their high school degree because they can't pass a math test, you sure as hell ought to be willing to take that math test and publish your scores. Guess what? Those tests would disappear overnight. None of these legislators, I tell you, the number of legislators in our country that could pass what we require kids to pass for high school math, if that's 1%, I'd be surprised. Less than 1%, that's what I'd be willing to bet. And so let these legislators then explain to us why it's so important to solve simultaneous equations or plot crossing points for polynomials, or, define what an imaginary number is, as though any adult in America uses imaginary numbers other than the people who do our budgets. Those numbers are imaginary in some respect. But those are the leverage points. And yet, how many takers did I get?
How many?
1,000 of the most progressive educators, a challenge organize people to do this and I'll fund you. 0 takers.
Are you
And so we
serious?
can walk the walk in terms of bringing deep change to education. Like, is it really going to change until college admissions changes or state mandated exams and curriculum change? I'm skeptical, and we could do it. Though I don't think people listening, I don't think you, when I say that, would say, oh my gosh, if the head of Ivy League College X got 2,000 alums saying we're cutting you off until, do you think that college would sit on its tail and not do anything? And if a bunch of the Ivy League colleges change admissions, do you think the rest of the university landscape would change quickly? Yeah, it's doable.
Well, that's actually very inspirational. That's right has to do with my last question, because I completely agree with you. I think right now, for example, I was asking about COVID. COVID kind of practically temporarily stopped accountability testing, SAT, ACT, and all those kind of things. If we had this group of people who wants to change, to actually take actions to change, it'll be fabulous. I think the book trying to write is really more invite people who wants to change to make the changes. So what are some of the things? We've been talking for really about almost an hour. It's great. So what would be some words you would like to say to people who might read the book, to say, okay, how people don't read books anymore. There may be 5 people read the book, but if they were going to read this, what would you say? This is the last. What would you tell people who are in the midst? There may be parents, there may be teachers, there may be principals, there may be students.
Yeah, I would ask everybody to just take some time and ask themselves, how much do I want to fight for this? Is this a fight worth fighting for? And whether it's your own kid, or the kids in your community, or the kids in your state, or the kids across an entire nation, how much do we want to fight for this? And what I tell people is, as I said, I don't claim to be an education expert, but I sure as heck know what's coming down the road when it comes to innovation, is that if we have millions and millions of kids adrift, millions of adults unable to find their way forward, no career options that make sense, no ability to be an informed, responsible citizen, there are no winners. This is how democracies fall apart. And so I just look at this and I say, hey, I'm willing to fight gosh dang hard for this, but it can't just be a few more workshops. It can't be one more design thinking session where we think we now know how to innovate, but never do anything about it. It needs dramatic rethinking quickly. And the thing is, people will say, back to we talked about the QWERTY typewriter. The reality is, right, that if a kid makes those changes, that kid's going to be in great shape. Now, it seems hard. It's nerve-wracking for parents, but I meet kids all across the country that just say, I'm not doing the bullshit of school. I'm going to find what I'm interested in and get really good at it. I'm going to use summers to turn that into a way to make my community better and actually derive serious amounts of financial support through that. And so, everybody feels like they're on this tightrope walking across the Grand Canyon. And if they step off it, they're going to fall 6,000 feet to their death. Actually, the tightrope is right on the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I mean, you get off the tightrope and suddenly you're backpacking through the Grand Canyon, having the most incredible experience you could have. But everybody still stays on that stupid tightrope, fearing that if they get off of it, it's certain death, when actually it's what opens up every door in life. And so whether you're a family thinking about this and it's your own kid, whether you're a teacher thinking about your class, a principal, whatever state commissioner, someday we may get a sensible secretary of education for our country. It's not the end of the world. It's actually the beginning of an expansive, creative universe of options for kids. If we just start bulldozing away this incredibly poorly thought out standardized curriculum tied to these pernicious high stakes tests. And I always use pernicious because it's one of those SAT words we all studied and never use, because as soon as I say pernicious, everybody's immediate reaction is, oh, SAT. I say, doesn't that tell you something? We study what's easy to test, not what's important to learn. And we need to shift that quickly.
Well, no, that's really beautiful. I have to tell you, let me actually stop recording this. So this is so good. It's that I really, really enjoyed